Hello, and welcome back to Introduction to Critical Sport Studies. Today we are going to examine the topic of heteronormativity, but in order to do so, I thought it would be important to have a brief history of the impact of LGBT experiences. I'll break this down into basically six categorical, spaces in time. The pre-1940s period, the next period that I refer to as the homophile years, 1940s to 1960s. Homophile actually means, if you were to break that down, same love. And so if you understand the idea of same-sex couples and sexuality, it's not necessarily about the physical sexual act, but it is about to the person who they identify as and who they identify as having their physical attraction to, and maybe even something more of a love for. So that was the term that was initially used, and eventually the terminology, as with most terminology that we'll examine today, changes over time. Then there's the Stonewall and emergence of radical gay liberation. I'd say 1969 through the 1970s. The gay rights movement of the 1970s we'll examine. So if you notice, I said gay liberation and then also gay rights. There's a difference here that we'll discuss. The rise of conservatism in the 1980s. And then finally, 2000 through today, what I would refer to as roll tide, really the tide that is moving with such momentum that repealing of these rights may be virtually impossible. Thus, the power of the social movements that have occurred with LGBTQ rights. So I want to first, in this early period, pre-1940s, examine the word gay. I put in quotations here, "that's so gay," or, quote, "that's so socially constructed." Because first, the word gay first arrived in the English language during the 12th century, meaning joyful, carefree, bright, and showy. By the 20th century, though, carefree aspect took on a meaning of uninhibited. This idea of uninhibited for a gay man or a gay woman is different than what we think of the word gay today. A gay man in, say, the 1910s, 1920s was a man who actually had many girlfriends, was not going to settle down. He was uninhibited. A gay woman was someone who had premarital sex, uninhibited, and might even be considered a prostitute. So the word gay started to take on this meaning of uninhibited, but also socially stigmatized. So you can see how then that by the mid-20th century, the term gay took on a more hedonistic meaning in society at this time. It meant uninhibited lifestyle, not just uninhibited sexually, but the entire lifestyle. Thus, gay took on an association with homosexuality. Likewise, at that same period, the term straight then became the antonym of gay, and meaning respectability and conventionality. So this meaning what is conventional for the time, straight versus gay. And that's how the term gay has been socially constructed over time. By the 1940s to the 1960s, gender roles are starting to be really solidified in society through media and images, colors taking on an identity for young children, such as blue, light blue for boys and pink for girls. Prior to this period, that was largely seen as unnecessary. This idea that gender roles were to be socially created for children really is a mid-20th century phenomenon as far as these images and ideas and icons that are associated with them. Also during this period, though, you had businesses being targeted, the closing of gay bars and businesses that promoted social gatherings of gays in community. You had anti-gay partner laws, employment rights infringements, someone could be fired if they were suspected to be homosexual. Blacklists sparked a conservative mindset that promoted fear and aggression towards norm deviations. The FBI moral perversion investigation, invasion of privacy and harassment. And the Kinsey Report begins this opening discussion about human sexuality and begins to fight stereotypes, including homosexuality. Now, Alfred Kinsey, his published report, The Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, was brought awareness to sexual behavior of the human male and the human female in 1953 in his study. His study supported the now common belief that 10% of the population is homosexual. Back in the 1950s, before this was published, the idea that someone was homosexual in society was believed to be a minute fraction of the population, less than 0.01%, that this was this unusual anomaly, if you will. His report discovered that people openly declared that they believed to be homosexual, and that 30% of the men questioned admitted to at least one homosexual experience in their life, thus starting to bring more awareness that homosexuals in society are a much greater population than once believed. By the 1960s, you have social protest against the mistreatment of homosexuals in society. The Stonewall riots in June of 1969, where this became this celebrated moment in the history of gay rights. Stonewall riots started at a bar in New York City known as the Stonewall Inn. And police would often go in, raid the bar, arrest people for just being gay. Usually maybe adding on other penalties such as gambling or drug possession, which were largely planted on the individuals to make so that they could prosecute and have the individual jailed. But what happened in 1969 was a riot against the police when they walked into the Stonewall Inn. That riot was celebrated a year later in June of 1970 with a parade through the streets of New York, the neighborhood in New York where the Stonewall riots had erupted a year earlier. Across the country, you had other cities putting on their own festivals and their own parades. That began the June celebration of what is today's Gay Pride celebration, largely in most cities once a year during the month of June. Other examples of discrimination, though, that went all the way up to the state level, the U.S. federal government, such as the Lavender Scare, an anti-communist witch hunt targeting suspected homosexuals in the U.S. State Department. This happened in the 1950s. 425 employees were actually fired on the suspicion of being gay. Now, why would someone be concerned with someone that is homosexual working in the State Department? Well, they could have had access to confidential information. And during this height of anti-communist scare and threat, the McCarthyism period, the concern was that if someone, say a communist spy, learned that a State Department worker was homosexual, he could be blackmailed for this information, because the alleged or suspected homosexual would certainly not want to come out to family and friends. This was not an inclusive period of time, and thus led by Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin, this anti-communist witch hunt known as the Lavender Scare led to the firing of 425 State Department employees just on suspicion of being gay. So gay liberation versus gay rights. Well, the gay liberation of the 1970s has much more to do with what we would call radical liberation, meaning being accepted for who they are, liberating themselves from heteronormativity, the idea of what is seen as the correct lifestyle in society, the heteronormative ideal. Gay rights, though, are the ideas that is the argument for individual rights such as civil rights that were suppressed. Gay liberationists wanted the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality from their list of mental illnesses, and in 1973 that occurred. So this is more of a liberating experience, knowing that people will see them as not as having a mental illness, but as being just different from someone else in society. Gay rights, though, uh, in gay rights violations in the 1970s, you could see Florida banned gay adoptions. Uh, many Several states tried to pass laws banning homosexuals from being school teachers. That was one case in Florida, and Anita Bryant, a country music artist, was ahead of that was ahead of that fight to have homosexuals barred from being public school teachers. She was a spokesperson for Florida Orange Juice, and she fought against gay liberation and gay rights on the side that she said that this was moral perversion. Anita Bryant, it's interesting because she was the face of Florida Orange Juice. I read in a book by George Chauncey that when the when she was very vocal about this, and she was in television ads for Florida Orange Juice, gay bars around the country stopped making drinks that included orange juice. So a screwdriver, which was a common drink to have, vodka and orange juice, was replaced with a drink known as the Anita Bryant. It was vodka and sour apple juice. Just a fun fact I like to include here. And also gay rights and gay liberation led to the election of San Francisco's Board of Supervisors, Harvey Milk. Now, if some of you saw the movie Milk, as I did, you may remember a scene where he's running for public office, and there are people with signs, some protesting him, but others supporting him. Those signs, one of them I caught when I was watching it. I saw that one side said, "Marriage equality now," and I thought, well, the filmmakers got that part wrong. Marriage equality was not something that homosexuals were fighting for in the 1970s. They were fighting for anything that they fought for the right to be different from heteronormative society, and rather than subscribe to the ideals of monogamy, marriage, and the laws of marriage. So this is something that's more of a 21st century argument for equal rights, which is the right for same-sex marriage. Now, in the 1980s, you also had a new socially constructed stigma with homosexuals. As the 1970s brought on advancement in gay rights, you have the 1980s, you have the first report of AIDS in 1981. Now, it started a national fear that points to gay lifestyle as a catalyst. It turns gay community into a leper community. Why was this so? Well, some of the first cases that were brought to the attention of the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, the CDC, were cases of a rare skin cancer that appeared in these young, which should be healthy, men. But the men, one thing that was unique about all of them, they had either identified as homosexual or bisexual, all stating that they had had sex with another man. This led to the AIDS very much being identified and socially constructed as a quote-unquote gay disease. So much so that even the CDC first referred to the disease as GRIDS, G-R-I-D-S, which was Gay-Related Immune Deficiency Syndrome. The FDA prohibited homosexuals from donating blood in 1983. They revised it in 2015, but homosexuals or anyone who's admitted to having sex with someone of their same sex today still cannot give blood if they've had sex with another man within, if a man has had sex with another man within the past 12 months. So this is still something that is socially constructed as a stigma for the homosexual community, connecting AIDS with the gay community. The AIDS Quilt Project began to bring this awareness and importance of AIDS and AIDS research to the public. A display that happened in front of the Washington Monument, where AIDS victims' families created these quilts that they would lay down together and create this large quilt on the lawn representing the life and death of someone that they loved. And ACT UP, a group formed, fights the misconceptions regarding AIDS and fights for AIDS prevention as well as government funding. Because in the 1980s, our president, Ronald Reagan, refused to even acknowledge the disease or the word AIDS up until about the 5th year of his presidency. And today, you have gay marriage. In 2004, voters began weighing in on same-sex marriage. The states many states started to pass bans on same-sex marriage. In 2004, I myself was living in Missouri, and I remember during that election cycle, there was a ban proposed on same-sex marriage in the state of Missouri. It was voted, I believe, 54% versus 46% in favor of a ban on gay marriage. And thus, this begins the unraveling of rights that same-sex couples were trying to embark on. They had created such ideas as same-sex unions, but not necessarily the term marriage. And you can actually say that it was the opposition to same-sex marriage, the conservative opposition, that actually paved the way for same-sex marriage to actually happen. Because once you had these bans put into law in states, legal challenges to these bans went all the way up to state Supreme Courts and then the U.S. Supreme Court. And in June 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the state ban on same-sex marriage was unconstitutional. So this brings us up to where we're at today in LGBTQ rights and liberation.